Hello friends, let's complete our calculator page and add the programming or the interactivity of the page. So for building the calculator, first thing we need is a Dart function that implements the calculator, the functionality, not the UI, just the computations. So for that, what we're going to do is we're going to use an element called the app custom. So a custom element is used to put functionality which is generic, which is functionality or nothing to do with UI. So I have this small little Dart function. We're using a package called expressions, which is a Dart package. And this is a class, and it has a single method called key. So it takes as input the key that has been pressed, and it returns the updated value of the calculator buffer. So it maintains an internal buffer, and you add a key, and whatever is the result after adding that key, it will return. So it's a fairly simple function, and the functionality is also a little crude in the sense you can improve it. So at this point, perhaps I can talk about, so right now what I've been doing is I've been copying and pasting the code from somewhere else. But in practice, you need an IDE where you can, when you type something, you get prompted for method types, parameter types, and you can do dynamic validation of what you're typing. So this is a very useful site called Dartpad. You can look it up on the net, and you can build applications there and test it. It's a pretty simple, pretty user-friendly and popular site. You can just test your Dart programs there. So for building such a thing where you don't have any Flutter in it, you can use that to build it and then copy and paste it here. And functions where you have to actually write Flutter code, I'll come back to it and tell you how to do it, because this IDE doesn't give you any prompts or any assistance in writing the code. So there it is, we have this calculator function. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to a page, and we're going to add some interactivity to the page through the page Flutter element. And like we did before, we will create an init function which gets called at the time the page is initialized. And let me walk you through what we have here. We use a global variable or a global member of the app object called state. And in that we create a new calculator which we just defined, and we put it in there. So that's done only once. We create the calculator, and that's it. Every time a key is pressed, we look up the same calculator, send the key, and get the result. So here is what we do when we, here, we need to change this thing. This is the name of the element. Now when an element is clicked, what we receive back is a value of the type UI element. When we did the movies list, we got a value of the type UI view because we clicked on a view. Here we're clicking on an element, so we're getting an element. Then we look up the calculator from a global state, and the input element that we receive, we look up the value of, we look up the property of label. So basically what we're saying is whichever element was clicked, get me the label of that button or element. So that label itself is the key. So we take that key, pass it to the calculator, and whatever result we get, we update the result. And this is done using a method called rebuild. So this is all in the documentation. You can look it up. Rebuild you can do on an element as well as you can do on a view. And when you are rebuilding a view, you are allowed to override the data. And when you're rebuilding an element, you are allowed to override its any of the parameters like the size, the style, value, of course. A lot of things you can override. So that's it. This is what we do. We create a calculator object, save it in the global state. So we have the same calculator every time a key is pressed. When a key is pressed, we just find out what key was pressed, pass it to the calculator function, get a result, and update the value. Fairly straightforward and simple. Now let's give it a try. And before that, let's save it. Okay, before we actually do generate a couple of things. One is we didn't give it a label. Let's skip that. Second thing is, to our result, let's give a value binding of 0, which means when the calculator opens, it will display a 0 there. So we know it doesn't. We're not looking at a blank space. Some value should appear. So we give it a 0. And now let's do a Flutter generate. Let's launch the calculator. We see that the page label has come now, and the 0 initial value has come. And now if we type something, we know so you can see the calculator in action. It's like I mentioned, it's a little crude. If I press 5 now, it's going to append it to the same value. So these are the things you can improve. You can work on the calculator code, clean these things up. So there you have it. The calculator page is now ready and done. So let me, one thing I wanted to explain is that functions like this, like where there's Flutter code involved, and the web IDE doesn't give you any opportunity to tell you the errors on the fly or give you prompts. So what you can do is typically you can start with a blank function, right? Come back to your IDE, which is the Android Studio, and you can open the page. You can look up the lib pages and calculator.dart. For example, that's where the page is, and this is the init function that we have provided. So what you can do is you can build your init function inside Android Studio, which means it will flash the errors as they happen. It will prompt you for methods. It will prompt you for parameter types and things like that. And it's much easier to write the Flutter code from Android Studio. So you can build it here and test it like we've been doing so far. And then once you're happy, then you can just copy paste this code and put it back into the IDE. So next time you generate, you obviously get the functioning and the latest code. So this was it about our app. Now we have built all the pages. You've you should have a fair idea on how to build any kind of function. Some things which still need explaining is how to override the styles, for example. Right? If you may want to give different color to the buttons or give different fonts, all this can be done. These are these are explained in the documentation. You can look it up. And so now I'll sign off from this episode. When I come back, we have one more episode to go, and I'm going to talk about the server-driven or the backend-driven UI. And we'll talk about some other ways you can customize or have more direct control on how the pages are rendered, etc. So I'm signing off now. I'll see you in the next episode, which hopefully will be our last. I'll see you then.